Hello, 22 Goals listeners. If you're enjoying our show, you might also like some of The Ringer's other narrative podcasts, like Book of Wrestling, a show about the Attitude Era of professional wrestling, stories about Mike Tyson, The Rock, and The Undertaker, to name just a few. Or maybe you'd like one of our culture narrative shows, like This Blew Up, which peels back the curtain of TikTok collab houses. Is it really that easy to blow up on TikTok? I have cute dogs. I can dance. I can't dance. We like making shows for you here at The Ringer, and we like you. Thanks for listening.
This episode is brought to you by Anytime Fitness. We may talk a whole lot about sports, but when it comes to keeping fit ourselves, there's definitely room for improvement. I hit this point early July. I was just like, I am not in good enough shape. I started trying to walk at least 15,000 steps a day, or hiking, or just anything to keep my legs moving. Now it's the end of 2023. I feel great. I had a physical 3 weeks ago, and the guy was like, "You're doing great. You're doing better than you were 3 years ago." I felt great. Whatever your goals are, progress is possible thanks to Anytime Fitness. Get a personalized plan and support from an expert coach anytime, anywhere. Visit anytimefitness.com to try Anytime Fitness for free. Start to train for your life. Terms, conditions, and restrictions apply. See website for details. This episode is brought to you by Atlassian. Atlassian software like Jira, Confluence, and Trello help power global collaboration for all teams so they can accomplish everything that's impossible alone. Because individually we're great, but together we're so much better. Learn how to unleash the potential of your team at Atlassian.com. Atlassian.com. Atlassian. Tap the banner or visit this episode's page to learn more.
So here's how this goes. In the late 1940s, in Brazil, in the city of Bauru, in the southeast of the country, a group of boys sets out to see a dead body. The dead body belongs to a pilot who has crashed his plane. Actually, it's not a plane. Technically, it's a glider. Do you know about gliders? I didn't really know. So picture a small plane without an engine. Another plane tows it up into the sky and then lets it go. And the pilot can steer it, can bank and turn, etc. The idea is that you go up in a glider and you soar. But gravity ultimately pulls you down. Hopefully gently, but down. So in Bauru, there's this new Aero Club, a club for aviation enthusiasts. These are mostly, I'm assuming, rich guys who enjoy flying as a hobby. The Bauru Aero Club is especially known for gliders. A small plane pulls you and your glider up into the air. It releases you. You sail on the air currents over the city, take in the view, and then glide down to the airfield and land. Only on this day, the pilot missed the airfield. I don't know what happened. If I have a single piece of life advice for you, if there are any young people listening to this podcast, I assume it's mostly young people who listen to this podcast, and given my youthful dynamism as a host, kids, my number one piece of life advice is respect gravity. Pilot crashes, glider wipes out, world is down, one aviation enthusiast. And as this is happening, somewhere else in Bauru, there's a group of boys hanging out in the street. 8, 9, 10 years old. Maybe they're playing soccer. Maybe they're just standing around. These are poor kids in a poor neighborhood. They're barefoot. They're wearing shirts made of the material that's used to bind wheat while it's being transported. The street where they're hanging around is probably made out of dirt. If there are any cars, they're like 1940s cars with those great long 1940s car curves. You know how 1940s cars all look like they're in the background of a Godfather movie? So these boys are hanging out on this dusty street, and they hear someone shouting that a pilot has gone down and died. And they're excited by this. If Stand By Me has taught us anything, it's that groups of boys who learned of the existence of a dead body between 1945 and 1970 had no choice but to attempt to find and view that body. So the kids set out across the city. Bauru is not huge. It's not Sao Paulo, but it's not tiny. About 52,000 people live there. The boys first go to the place where the crash happened. They see the wreckage. The body is already at the morgue. I don't know about you, but I'm not sure I would have had the nerve as a kid to attempt to infiltrate a morgue. But these kids are mischievous. They're not bad kids, but they get in trouble a lot. They sneak into other people's orchards and steal mangoes, that kind of thing. So they're like, you know what would be a great thing to do? Infiltrate a morgue. So they set out once again. One of these kids, we're gonna call him Edson, because that's his name, is the leader of this expedition. Edson is especially interested in seeing the pilot's body because Edson wants to be a pilot. That's his dream. He loves everything to do with planes and gliders and the people who fly them. He ditches school sometimes and goes out to the Aero Club to watch the flying. But he also likes to go out to the airfield and just watch the pilots, and he thinks that's gonna be me someday. He's not a good student, as you can maybe tell from the fact that he's cutting school at such an early age. He gets busted by his teacher pretty regularly, and his teacher punishes him by making him kneel on a pile of dried beans, hard on your knees. But he doesn't usually get punished too severely because he's likable. Real, charming, rascal energy. A lot of schemes, a lot of harebrained plans. People like to go along with whatever he's doing. He's not a good student, but lately he's been trying a little harder. He's been trying a little harder because he had a talk with his dad about becoming a pilot. His dad's a hard worker, but he has a job that doesn't pay much, and he has a workplace injury that causes him a lot of pain, and he just has to push through it. So he takes the question of Edson's future seriously. And he tells him, you can be a pilot, but you're going to have to work a lot harder at school. And Edson is doing his best. Now, Edson and his buddies make their way across town to the morgue. And they get there just as the autopsy is beginning. They find a dirty window that they can huddle around. And through this window, they can spy on the doctors cutting up this poor dead pilot. And at first, Edson thinks this is cool. His first dead body. But then, one of the doctors tries to move one of the corpse's arms, and blood comes spurting out onto the floor. And Edson is suddenly seized by extreme horror. For a little rascal, he's already got kind of an anxious side. He has a lot of nightmares, he sleepwalks sometimes, but this is worse. He starts to see the image of the pilot's body in his head. He sees it in his dreams and wakes up in terror. And so Edson gives up the idea of becoming a pilot. He's gonna need a new dream. I'm Brian Phillips, by the way. Welcome to 22 Goals, the story of the World Cup. Why am I telling you about these kids traversing Bauru in the 1940s to see a dead body? I don't know. Some questions have no good answers. Mickey's a mouse, Donald's a duck, Pluto's a dog. What the hell is Goofy? Don't answer that. It's possible that I'm telling you this story mostly because I'm stalling. Because gravity ultimately pulls you down, hopefully gently. And today is the last episode of 22 Goals. And I don't want it to end. I have enjoyed making this show so much. I've enjoyed talking to you about these stories so much. You know, this is the first podcast I've ever done. I didn't really know what to expect going in. And it turns out that these chats of ours, in which I do all the talking, have become very important to me. It's like going to therapy without all the inconvenient life advice. So, I don't know. I'm looking for things to talk about. Because if I keep talking, maybe the show doesn't have to end. Does it work like that? If I just start yammering in detail about like a random mystery novel published in the second half of the 1980s, can we stay here a little longer? Please? I'm kidding. Am I kidding? It's funny, though, my reluctance to get to the end. Because in a way, this has been a show about endings from the very beginning. A soccer goal is an ending. It ends an attack. World Cups are also about endings. The ending is where you crown the champion. The ending is the point of the whole tournament. Get a bunch of teams together, see who's best, give them a special cup. Or in FIFA's case, give them a cheaper replica of a special cup while you retain the original permanently at your own office for some reason. Maybe life is about the journey and not the destination. Soccer is pretty pro-destination. So, we have to get in line with the logic of this whole endeavor. This is a show about endings. I love endings. Let's embrace the ending. In the second half of the 1980s, a random mystery novel was published by a writer called Herb Resnickow. I'm kidding. No. Here's what we're actually gonna do today. We're going to embrace the ending, but we're also going to avoid the ending. We're gonna do both at the same time. Because the last story we're going to tell on 22 Goals is the story of a beginning. We're here to talk about one of the most significant beginnings in the history of soccer. In a normal episode, this would be the place where I gave you a preview of all the stuff we were about to cover. In a normal episode, I'd do a little signposting. I'd be like, we're here today to talk about Ludwig van Beethoven, whose late string quartets pushed the boundaries of classical harmony, yada yada. I would legitimately love to make a podcast about Beethoven. That would be so much fun. That's what I'd do in a normal episode. But this isn't a normal episode. This is the last episode, and I'm stalling, so bear with me. Before we get to the soccer action, and there will be soccer action, my friends, there will be soccer action aplenty. I'm gonna take you down another little tangent. I promise it's relevant. This is not a soccer podcast. This is a long goodbye. Let's make the most of the time we have left. So, Brazil in the 30s and 40s. In the interior of Brazil, rural areas and villages were fairly slow to receive electricity. A lot of them weren't electrified until well into the 20th century. There was a town called Três Corações in the Minas Gerais state that had no electricity for many years. Even into the late 1930s, if you wanted light, you lit a candle or a gas lamp. There was a girl in Três Corações called Celeste, spelled like Celeste in English. She came from poverty. Her dad was a cart driver, meaning he had like a big wooden wagon, and he'd haul wood or carry loads for people. Três Corações didn't have electricity, but like most places in Brazil, it did have a small local soccer team, a semi-professional team. Players got a little money, not enough to make much of a living, but a little bit. So when Celeste was in her mid-teens, when she was 14 or 15, she met a guy who played for the Três Corações soccer club. His name was João, but like many Brazilian soccer players, even back in the late 1930s, he was known by a nickname. He was known as Dondinho. Great nickname, in my opinion. Dondinho was from a town about 70 miles away. He was doing his military service in Três Corações and playing soccer while he was there. He was older than Celeste, about 22 or 23, but they hit it off. I don't know how Celeste's dad, the cart driver, felt about this, but probably not great because, well, Celeste was 14 and Dondinho was 22. And in late 1930s Brazil, soccer players had kind of an unreliable reputation. They were like cowboys. Cowboys and soccer players both being badly paid, irresponsible, impulsive, a little glamorous, apt to leave town without warning, and prone to having very sore thighs. Regardless, when Celeste was 15, she and Dondinho got married. At 16, she was pregnant with their first child. At around the same time, workers came in with heavy machines and brought electricity to Três Corações. For the first time, there were electric lights. And Dondinho was so enthusiastic about this modern miracle that when their son was born, he named the baby after the man credited with inventing the light bulb, Thomas Edison. Dondinho and Celeste didn't literally name the baby Thomas Edison. They gave him a name more inspired by Edison. They called him Edson. Yes, our Edson, the little scamp who was so afraid of the dead pilot's body. These are his parents. This is his birth. Within a few years' time, Celeste had another son and a daughter. Dondinho was a good father, but soccer didn't bring in much money, and Celeste was worried all the time about how to make ends meet. By the time she was in her early 20s, she was trying to hold a family of 5 together, and she was afraid a lot of the time. They lived in ramshackle houses. They moved around because Dondinho went from one small club to another. Celeste blamed soccer for her troubles, and she was determined that her kids would get an education. She was determined that they would not become footballers like their dad. In 1944, when Edson was almost 4, he got to ride on a train for the first time. His dad had finally been offered a good job. A town called Bauru, near Sao Paulo, had a soccer club that wanted to sign him, and they offered to get him a steady government job if he came on board, potentially a way out of poverty and an end to Celeste's fear. So they packed up what little they had and set out. Edson was enchanted by the train. He watched the landscape rolling past, and he'd open the big windows on the train and lean out to feel the air rushing over him. He leaned out so far that he nearly fell out of the train, but Dondinho grabbed him and pulled him back in just in time. When they got to Bauru, bad news was waiting for them. The soccer club had suddenly changed owners. They still wanted Dondinho to play, but the government job was off the table. Back to poverty. Edson and his younger siblings and his parents and several other family members who'd come to Bauru all had to crowd into one small house. The roof leaked. The family never went hungry, but dinner was sometimes a slice of banana with some bread. When Edson was old enough, meaning when he was about 7, he managed to get together enough money for a shoe shine kit, and he went out into the town to shine other people's shoes, even though he had no shoes of his own, and he brought in a little extra money that way. Edson and his friends spend their time playing in the street. They get up to a lot of mischief and have a lot of fun. But Edson has not only his dad's fun-loving streak, but also that slightly anxious streak that he might have picked up from his mom. He starts keeping track of all the times he could have died, but didn't. He could have fallen out of the train window on the way to Bauru. One day, he and his friends are swimming in the river behind the train tracks, and he gets caught in the middle of the stream and nearly drowns. He's saved by a man who comes along and holds out a long stick. Another time, there's a rainstorm, and he's hanging out in this hideout he and his friends have built, a sort of big hole in the ground near the street. He's hiding from his mom, who's furious because he hasn't done his homework. She finds him, drags him home, and makes him study. A little later, a neighborhood kid pounds on the door and tells them that the earth around the hole has collapsed in the rain and buried another little boy alive. Edson watches them pull that little boy out of the cave-in, gives him more nightmares. He feels guilty, as if he's somehow responsible for the cave-in. He often feels a little guilty about the things he does. He thinks a lot about sin. He's a devout Catholic, and he tries to reason himself out of his guilt. When he steals mangoes, he thinks, this isn't really a sin, because many of those mangoes would have fallen to the ground and gone to waste, so it's not really stealing. He doesn't want to be a bad person. And for many years, after the hideout caves in, he's afraid of the dark. He loves watching his dad play soccer. Dondinho is a forward. He's a talented player. But in Bauru, he's suffered a knee injury that's never quite healed. So he's playing through pain a lot of the time. But being in the stadium, watching his dad score goals is absolutely thrilling for Edson. He knows his mom disapproves of the game. When he watches his dad, he gets totally overwhelmed by passion. So overwhelmed that when he hears a fan yelling insults at his dad, he picks up a brick and challenges this adult fan to fight, which leads to a brawl in the stadium. He and his friends play soccer in the street and in yards and in empty lots around the town. They play barefoot because they can't afford shoes. They also can't afford a ball, so they have to stuff wadded up paper or rags into a sock and play with that. They steal laundry from clotheslines to try to pad the sock into a proper sphere. After the incident with the dead pilot, Edson is less motivated at school because he doesn't want to fly anymore. He also has a really strict teacher who, when he talks out of turn, stuffs balled up sheets of paper into his mouth, which really hurts. So he's spending more time playing soccer. He loves it, and he's really good at it. Dondinho helps him with his technique, which is a big advantage. Though there are downsides to being the son of the neighborhood soccer player. Whenever another kid kicks a ball through someone's window and runs off, the owner of the window invariably comes to Dondinho and Celeste's house, pounds on the door, and blames Edson for the accident. One day, he decides he wants to start a soccer club for his friends. A really nice idea. Problem: they don't have a ball, and they don't have any kits, and they also don't have any money. So they devise a two-pronged scheme to raise funds. Prong number one, they all collect soccer stickers, kind of like trading cards, but in sticker form. None of these kids have been anywhere near a television, so soccer stickers are one of the best sources of information they have about, what the stars on the Brazil national team look like. So they pool their sticker collections together and figure that if they can assemble some complete sets, they can trade those for gear. Prong number two, they concoct a plan to steal peanuts out of freight trains and sell them outside the local movie theater. Edson is one of the boys who sneaks into the train wagon. He's terrified. The peanuts come in big sacks. The boys slit the sacks and let the peanuts spill out into the bowls and sieves they've brought to hold them. They sneak back out. Success. They toast the peanuts, sell the peanuts to moviegoers. Now they can afford shirts and shorts. They trade their sticker albums for a ball. They go back to steal more peanuts. This time, they get caught. Someone spots them. They have to run like mad to get away. That ends the peanut heist. They can still start their club. They just have to play barefoot. They nickname themselves the Shoeless Ones. Speaking of nicknames, around this time in the early 1950s, when they're 10 or 12 years old, Edson's friends give him a nickname. The nickname is a nonsense word. No one's sure where it comes from or what it means, if it even means anything. And Edson hates it. Absolutely hates it. He's proud to be named after Thomas Edison. He likes his real name. He gets suspended from school for punching a kid who calls him by the nickname. And after that, his friends realize, oh wow, this genuinely bothers him. He genuinely does not want us to call him by this name. So they do what all true friends would do in this situation. They mercilessly double down on the nickname and refuse to call him by his real name ever. One day, the mayor of Bauru makes an exciting announcement. He's starting a new tournament for youth clubs. The Shoeless Ones are desperate to play in this tournament, but they can't. Why? Because the rules say you have to have shoes to play. Rude. 3 of the boys on the team are brothers. Their dad is a salesman. He makes a pretty good living compared to most of the kids' parents. And he, at last, agrees to buy soccer shoes for all the kids with 2 conditions. Number 1, they have to be even more serious about their training. Number 2, they have to change their nickname to something that can withstand basic fact-checking. Done. They get shoes. They become Ameriquinha. They start practicing, and at first, they're not sure if they like playing in shoes. Shoes are super awkward. The kids feel clumsy, they feel weird. But they enter the tournament anyway. And it turns out that they're really good. Who knew? They reach the final. The final is played in the big local stadium, the same place where Dondinho plays his games. Thousands of people come to watch. The former shoeless ones, the newly shod ones, the shoeful ones, win the match. Edson is the star player. He finishes as the tournament's top scorer. The crowd chants his nickname. The nickname he hates so much that he decked a kid for using it. But now, listening to all these people, he thinks, maybe it won't be so bad being called Pelé. There is a question hanging over this episode, like the ending of a podcast over the final installment of that podcast. The question is, why does soccer bring us so much joy? Where does this feeling come from? How does this, frankly, quite silly activity, watching people bap a ball around with their feet, regardless of the shod or unshod status of those feet, how does it tap into such a deep and powerful current of happiness? I know joy isn't the only thing soccer brings us. It's not the only strong feeling. There's also frustration, anger, camaraderie, maybe, anxiety, hope. There's misery. When Brazil lost in the final of the 1950 Men's World Cup, the first time they'd ever hosted the tournament, the final was in Rio at the brand new Maracanã. Edson saw his father cry for the first time. Edson himself cried, sobbed, actually. He went to his room where there was a picture of Jesus on the wall, and he wept and asked Jesus why Brazil was being punished. Soccer stirs up a lot of strong feelings, but joy is the goal. Joy is what all the rest of it is building toward. What do you want when you're a fan? Every time your team has the ball, you want them to score a goal. Every season, you want them to win a championship. You want to see your favorite player hit the winning shot. You want goosebumps to break out all over your body. You want to feel as if the top of your head has been taken off.
This episode is brought to you by State Farm. You might say all kinds of stuff when things go wrong, but these are the words you really need to remember. Like a good neighbor, State Farm is there. They've got options to fit your unique insurance needs, meaning you can talk to your agent to choose the coverage you need, have coverage options to protect the things you value most, file a claim right on the State Farm mobile app, and even reach a real person when you need to talk to someone. Like a good neighbor, State Farm is there.
This podcast is brought to you by AT&T Fiber with All-Fi. Something tells me that the guy watching sports for 13 hours straight on Sunday, who then stays up watching the recaps of those 13 hours, then calls his friends to talk about it, is definitely going to notice that half-a-second delay.
Get AT&T Fiber with All-Fi and watch sports any time of day from anywhere in your house. Live like a gigillionaire. Limited availability in select areas. Go to att.com/hypergig to check eligibility. Coverage may require extenders at additional charge.
I used to work in a bank. Isn't that funny? I wasn't always an internationally revered soccer podcaster. I had a career in finance. My career in finance occurred at a small town bank in north central Oklahoma, First National in Ponca City, pretty high powered. It was on Grand Avenue, just down from the old vaudeville theater and Junior's gun and lock shop. I was a bank teller. This was my summer job for 3 or 4 years in high school and college. Someone at the bank Someone, I assume, who had been kicked in the head by a mule as a child, looked at me as a teenager and said, well, he looks like he'd be good at two things: interacting with customers and responsibly keeping track of enormous sums of money. Application accepted. It was literally like that. You're hired. Welcome aboard. Here is a box full of $47,000 in cash. Please don't lose it. I didn't like working at the bank because it took me away from my true passion of being unemployed, but I learned a lot from it. I can count money really fast now, like drug dealer fast. I got the brisk right thumb. What else did I learn about? I learned a lot about FBI background checks, because the handyman/maintenance guy at the bank, this huge, towering, lumbering dude called Mark, who wore blue coveralls and very memorable sideburns, he used to come to my window and tell me about how he was being vetted for a job in government intelligence. And the only thing holding up his career change from local bank handyman to CIA operative was the background check. Mark led me to understand that he had secrets in his past, secrets that must not be inquired into. But these secrets would not impair his ability to pursue American interests abroad in an espionage capacity. He was conservatively 6'4", about 300 pounds, also conservatively, extremely conspicuous physical massiveness is the number one trait you look for in a spy. And Mark told me that the FBI would be asking me about him and that it was extremely important that I not pass them any compromising information. The future of America might depend on it. I would sit there kicking my legs on my stool in my teller window from the punishingly early hour of 9:15 a.m. through a grueling workday that ended at 4:30. It's called banker's hours. It's respectable. And I'd deposit Social Security checks for blue-haired grandmothers and guys in undershirts who smelled powerfully of gasoline would come in with like purple velvet Crown Royal bags full of nickels and ask me to change them for $5 bills. And my fellow tellers and I would gossip about whatever happened on Guiding Light. And as the world turned that day, my fellow tellers, all being women in their 50s, it was awkward at first, but they soon accepted me as one of them and let me into all of their chats about which celebrities had had plastic surgery and whether that plastic surgery was working for them or not. And at the end of the day, we'd have to tally up all our money and make sure the totals all matched up with what we'd taken in and handed out that day. And mine absolutely never did. And so most days, the head teller, this woman called Teresa, who I mostly remember because she loved riverboat gambling. She was constantly taking trips to Tunica, a town across the Mississippi in the state of Mississippi, to play slot machines on a boat. Most days, she would have to come to my window and go through all my stuff and try to figure out what had happened to the $1,100 that the machine said I was missing, or how I had managed to acquire $462 more than I was supposed to have. And periodically, an armed car would show up and deliver cash to the bank. They'd wheel it in on dollies in these big shrink-wrapped cubes. And a few times, not often, but 3 or 4 times over the years, I'd have to go into the vault to help get the cash put away, shift the bales of $20 bills or whatever. The vault was exactly what you'd picture when you picture a bank vault in an old small-town bank. A huge walk-in safe with a thick metal door and a handle that looked like you could steer a ship with it. And I remember a couple of times being left alone in the vault and hoisting up like $100,000 on my shoulder and just wondering, how did life put me here? How did the universe contrive to deposit me? Ha. And that reminds me, please tell your dad thanks for all the jokes he's texted me this season. What a nice guy. How did the universe contrive to deposit me, seemingly at random and for no reason, in a literal treasure trove? Anyway, the reason I'm telling you this story is that, I don't know, I sometimes have the same feeling watching soccer, a sport which is, I think, full of people who would enjoy riverboat gambling if they ever gave it a try. How did we end up inside this weird vault full of priceless moments? How did life contrive to deposit us in such a strange place, inside this frankly quite silly game that is somehow full of treasures that defy all explanation? In the early 1950s, life deposits Edson Aranche de Nascimento in the youth soccer program at Bauru, his dad's club. His dad has just recently retired. Poor Celestia is never going to be free of having a family member who plays soccer for Bauru. First Dondinho, now Edson. But I should stop calling him Edson. By 1953, hardly anyone is still calling him by his real name. He's Pelé. At Bauru, he's coached by Valdemar de Brito, a former striker for the Brazil national team. Pelé leads Bauru to 3 straight youth championships. He gets offered a chance to play for a bigger team in Rio. Dondinho thinks it's a great opportunity, but Celestia says no chance. I am not sending my baby off to a big city by himself. And besides, he's not going to be a footballer. He's going to have a stable job. He's going to be a school teacher. But he's making money now playing soccer. He's got a little salary from Bauru. In one tournament game, he scores the winning goal, and the team's supporters invade the pitch and start throwing coins at him. And he feels so proud that he's able to pick up all these coins and bring them home to his mom. 1956, when Pelé is 15, Valdemar de Brito gets him a tryout at Santos, a big club, but one not nearly as far away as Rio. Celestia agrees to let him go. He doesn't sleep the night before he leaves. He knows the Santos players from his collection of stickers, so he can picture them, and he wonders if he'll be good enough to play with them. Santos is on the coast. He's never seen the ocean before. He wonders what it will be like to finally see the sea. He's still, in other words, the same imaginative, slightly fretful kid that we've been getting to know. There's this mix of fun-loving mischief and fastidious anxiety that we encounter again and again through Pelé's life. He wants to get away with something, but he also wants to be a good person, and he thinks he'll be punished if he doesn't do what he's supposed to. He wants to steal mangoes, but stealing mangoes might be a sin. He wants to swim in the river, but the currents can catch you and drown you. He wants to skip his homework and play in his hideout, but hideouts might cave in on you. He wants to fly, but gravity pulls you down. He plays his first senior match for Santos at the age of 15 on the 7th of September, 1956. He scores a goal. The following year, at the age of 16, he's a starter and he leads the league in scoring. Just about a year after signing his first professional contract, he's called up to the Brazilian national team. He scores a goal in his first game, becoming the youngest player ever to score for Brazil, a record he still holds today. Pelé, is not a big guy. He's about 5'8". But he has this strange quality. It's not exactly that he seems bigger than he really is, but he somehow seems denser than other people. Soccer players sometimes seem physically kind of ethereal. Cruyff seemed ethereal. Ronaldinho seemed ethereal. Pelé is the opposite of that. He's like a sculpture made from some rare element. It looks small, but when you try to pick it up, it weighs like 600 pounds. He's compact in the way a collapsing star is compact. I'm not describing this well, so here's what we'll do. Let's think about death in comic fantasy novels. So there's a funny thread in Terry Pratchett's Discworld novels. I think it starts in Mort, I'm not absolutely sure, where Pratchett says, we've got it all backwards where death is concerned. I mean death as in like the Grim Reaper, physical embodiment of death, the skeleton with the sickle and the black cloak and whatnot. Really funny character in those novels, incidentally. We imagine that death can pass through solid walls because death is sort of spirit-like and insubstantial and not quite real. But actually, Pratchett says, death can pass through solid walls because he's more real than everything else. You don't walk through solid matter because you're less substantial than matter. You walk through solid matter because it's less substantial than you. The key is being more embodied, not less. And that's how it looks when you watch Pelé play. Like the comic Grim Reaper of Discworld, Pelé passes through ranks of defenders with ease because he is more physically, solidly real than they are. It's as if he's playing in a special spotlight that leaves everyone else in a little bit of shadow. Everyone else looks translucent around him. How else do you explain the fact that he scores in nearly every game he plays when he's still, literally, a child? How do you explain the fact that while he's still a teenager, he sets a scoring record in the Brazilian domestic league that still stands today? How do you explain the fact that he sends fans into raptures, seemingly by accident, without meaning to? What is the source of this joy? Where does it come from? 1958. At the age of 17, Pelé is called up to play in his first World Cup. 2 years earlier, he was consulting his sticker collection to learn what top-level soccer players looked like. 2 years earlier, he was kneeling down on the beach at Santos to taste the seawater to find out whether it was really salty. Now he's crossing the ocean to play for the Jules Rimet Trophy against the best players on Earth. In so many ways, he's still the same kid. The same nightmares, the same fear of the dark. He's excited for the trip because, for the first time in his life, he gets to fly on an airplane. The 1958 Men's World Cup is played in Sweden. It's a long trip. They stop in Rome first to play a couple of friendlies against Italian teams. Pelé walks around the Vatican for the first time and goes to Mass. They fly over the Swiss Alps. He watches the snow-capped peaks drift by below. He loves Sweden right away. Everything is so well organized. The hotel is so comfortable. That little note of fastidiousness again. When the team goes out dancing, he meets a girl named Elena with blue eyes and blonde hair, and they have a little romance while he's in the country. Being at the World Cup is so much fun. But he's nursing a knee injury. He's rehabbing it as hard as he can with a painful regimen that involves boiling hot towels. But the doctor keeps him out of Brazil's first match against Austria and their second match against England. Before the third match against the USSR, he's able to play in practice games again. Pelé and the great Brazilian star Garrincha, whom we talked about on the program last week, Pelé and Garrincha are both playing for the reserves, and they absolutely destroy the first team. Third game against the USSR, Pelé's name is on the team sheet. The Soviets are one of the tournament favorites, and when he steps out onto the pitch, he's shocked by how big they are. The opening whistle blows, and he officially becomes the youngest player ever to play in a World Cup. Brazil wins the match 2-0, and Pelé contributes an assist. The win puts the team through to the quarterfinals, but Pelé is mad at himself because he hit the post with a shot and missed a couple of chances he felt he should have converted. In the quarterfinals, Brazil beats Wales 1-0. Pelé scores the winning goal. He's less mad at himself. In the semifinals, Brazil beats France 5-2, and Pelé scores a hat trick. He scores all 3 winning goals. Now he's not mad at anyone. Being at the World Cup really is a lot of fun. World Cup final, Brazil versus Sweden, June 29th, 1958. It's a dark, cloudy day. Pelé is 17 years, 249 days old. Minor crisis before the match because Brazil and Sweden both famously wear yellow. One team slightly more famously than the other team. One of them is going to have to change shirt colors. Long story short, it's Brazil, but what color will they wear? Someone says white. The players recoil in horror because Brazil wore white in the 1950 World Cup final, which they lost to Uruguay. That was the day Pelé saw his father cry. Quick side note, technically, that match was not the 1950 World Cup final. Technically, there was no 1950 World Cup final. You know how I'm always saying FIFA loves a group stage? In the 1950 World Cup final, they had a group stage for the championship. Those SOBs actually did it. Took the 4 teams and put them in a round robin. Personally, I say no thank you to that concept, but honestly, I have to hand it to FIFA just for following their hearts. The fuck everything, we're doing 5 blades of World Cup group stage organization. Brazil can't wear white. So some team assistants have to go out and buy 22 blue t-shirts. Hey, 22. And they sew on the Brazilian badges. During the anthems, Pelé pictures his father anxiously crouched by the radio at home, and he thinks, I'm not going to let him down. Kickoff. Sweden scores almost immediately via their captain, Niels Lidholm. Nifty little move from the edge of the area. 5 minutes later, Brazil equalizes via Vavá, which is a delightful thing to say, via Vavá. It's like a street in La Dolce Vita. Vavá scores again from close range in the 32nd minute. Va-va-voom, Brazil leading 2-1 at halftime. 10 minutes into the second half, Pelé is in the middle of the Swedish penalty area. Here we go. He's tightly marked by one defender, and there's another defender in reserve. But he calls for a long pass from the wingback, Nilton Santos. Nilton Santos plays a good ball in between the two defenders. Pelé is able to control it with his chest while keeping the first defender behind him. He lets the ball fall to the ground and bounce once, and then he does something so delightful. You can watch the replay of this goal as many times as you like, and it never stops being surprising, and it never stops making you smile. As the second defender, Bengt Gustafsson, is closing him down, he chips the ball almost straight up into the air. It looks like a kid doing a yo-yo trick. Gustafsson's forward momentum carries him right under the ball. Pelé ducks around him so that when the ball comes down, he's unmarked in the middle of the area, free to take the shot. Do you remember the question we asked earlier, the end of the podcast question? We're almost at the beginning, which means we're almost at the end. The question is, why does soccer bring us so much joy? What we can say right now, as the ball is falling through the air toward Pelé's foot, is that there's no one simple answer. There are a lot of answers. We'd need way more than 22 goals to explore them all. But one answer, one of my favorite answers, is that soccer adapts itself to whoever is playing it and whoever is watching it and finds ways to speak to them in their own language. Soccer finds your own private words and whispers them back to you. I don't think any athlete who ever lived has inspired more joy than Pelé. And what have we seen about Pelé? He's charismatic. He's a bit of a rascal. He loves a good peanut heist. He loves sneaking out of school. He loves making the fun choice. But he's also got that side that's afraid of doing wrong, afraid of being hurt or punished, afraid he'll crash if he goes up too high. Well, what's a goal in soccer but a way of doing the fun thing and being rewarded for it? What's a goal but a way of getting away with something and being celebrated for it? You score a goal in soccer and you've done it. You've pulled off your heist. You've played your prank. You've hidden from the guard. And instead of the adults and authority figures wanting to grab you by the ear and take you home, or making you kneel on dried beans, or stuffing wads of paper in your mouth, instead of God almost drowning you in a river, all the adults and authority figures cheer you on. And God seems okay with it too. It's a sin reimagined as an act of virtue. I think one of the reasons Pelé is so infectiously joyful to watch is that he experienced the game as a place in which he could express his true nature without fear. Everyone needs one of those, right? Obviously, he had astonishing physical gifts. But it's more than that. The game was uniquely adapted to let him perform a central conflict in his psyche again and again and again and overcome it. And that's beautiful. And people felt that story and responded to it every time he scored a goal. You know, people make fun of Pelé now because he's so corporate, because he takes too many endorsement deals or loves money too much or whatever. But look at how he's programmed. Look at how he grew up. He was a kid who grew up with nothing in a house where the water poured in through the roof when it rained. He was a kid who grew up with a dad who loved soccer and a mom who thought it could never be a stable life. He was so proud the day Bauru fans threw coins at him because he could take that money home to his mom. And you expect that kid to have the same attitude toward money and integrity that you do? I'm sorry, I am footnote 1C colonialism-ing any middle to upper class American who thinks Maradona is so badass and judges Pelé for being mercenary. You haven't walked a mile in his shoes, and you couldn't because he didn't have any. What you sense when you watch Pelé play is this tiny undercurrent of hesitation, of vulnerability. Is this actually okay for me to do? I'm allowed to do this? I'm allowed to be this good? And then the flood of pleasure as he realizes yet again that the universe is going to be generous. He is allowed. This is exactly what people want from him. This is exactly what he's supposed to do. The ball keeps falling because gravity ultimately pulls you down. But it never hits the ground. He hits it on the volley while it's still in the air, and it flies past the Swedish goalkeeper Carl Svensson and into the net. He leaps in the air and bounces like he's lost all control over his own body. He scores again at the very end of the game, a header, 17 years old. When he realizes Brazil has won the World Cup, he faints in front of the goal. Garrincha has to run over and lift his legs to get blood to his head. When he wakes up, all he can think of is how he can talk to his parents. He thinks, I've got to tell my dad. I've got to tell my dad. Finally, he breaks down weeping. He sobs on the shoulder of the goalkeeper, Gilmar. This is how you fly without ever having to come down. Well, you know how the rest of the story goes. Pelé wins 3 World Cups. Pelé becomes, by some accounts, the first Black global sports superstar. Pelé becomes, by some metrics, the most famous human being on the planet. Pelé becomes the best paid athlete in the world. Pelé becomes the one soccer player people who've never watched a second of soccer in their lives know and love. The Brazilian national team travels the world. People get down on their knees to kiss the ground where he walks. Barney Ronay, the great Guardian soccer writer, wrote a piece about him last year that I really like. One of the things he says in the piece really struck home for me. And that is that with later stars like Lionel Messi, there's a feeling of inevitability about their careers. The soccer talent scouting machine is so large and sophisticated today that a player with that gargantuan a gift would have a hard time slipping through the cracks. But there's no inevitability about Pelé. Pelé could so easily not have happened. I don't know about you. I don't care all that much about scoring records or who's the greatest player of all time or any of that stuff. What I care about is that this person played the game in this way. And when you pick any moment in this story, picture him with his hands cupped on the dirty glass outside the morgue window. Picture him on the beach, seeing the ocean for the first time. Take any moment from the beginning of this story, and the whole story looks like a miracle. He never plays in Europe. Some big clubs try to sign him, but Brazil passes a law declaring him a national treasure to prevent him from leaving. Same reason I'm not podcasting in Luxembourg. He retires in 1977 after a stint with the New York Cosmos. He gets older. In the second half of the 1980s, he co-writes a random mystery novel with an author called Herb Reznikow called The World Cup Murder. I haven't read it, doesn't look great, but he also writes an autobiography called Pelé, the Autobiography by Pelé, which is possibly the best sports book I've ever read. He gets maybe a little more comfortable with himself. He gets a little complacent. He starts calling himself the Beethoven of soccer. I told you it would be fun to make a podcast about Beethoven. He gets a little too friendly with FIFA executives like Sepp Blatter. He gets old. It's sports. It happens. But the modern game of soccer is made in his image. And the story of the beginning of Pelé is, in so many ways, the story of the World Cup and the game as we know it. It's because of him that we talk about soccer as the beautiful game. It's because of him that we have the lovely ideal and marketing cliche of Brazil. Every player after him has been judged by the standard he set. He's the model. So when you watch the World Cup final, when you watch any game, really, when you watch the next game you watch, and you see the enormously complex and sophisticated machinery of hype and media and money and internationally revered podcasting infrastructure, take a second to remind yourself that it all goes back to a barefoot boy named after Thomas Edison, hanging out in the street with his friends, kicking a ball made of rags, and deciding to go see a dead body. That was 22 Goals, the story of the World Cup, written by me, Brian Phillips. And okay, I need to thank some people. I saw a tweet the other day that was a quote from some famous film director. I've already forgotten which famous film director. Information just washes over me. I don't know who it was, but some acclaimed movie guy. And he said in this tweet, he was quoted as saying that no good work ever came from a happy set. What that means is that you need tension and conflict and friction during the creative process to make a good movie. And I basically took that as the director, whoever he was, it was definitely a he, saying, it's cool that I yell at people a lot because I make good movies. Well, whatever. A lot of people responded to this tweet by talking about other acclaimed directors who are famous for the happy and supportive environments they create on their sets while still putting out good films. And I found all those replies really comforting because I've never had an experience working with other people that was happier or more fun or that involved less conflict and friction than the experience I've had making this show with the group of people I was lucky enough to work with on it. You know, I came into this having never made a podcast before and having no idea how to make a podcast. And I will never forget how the people whose names I'm about to read got me through it and made it fun and went above and beyond week in, week out to make the show as good as it could be. The executive producers of 22 Goals are three people I've worked with for a frighteningly long time now, and three people I'm happy to call my friends: Chris Ryan, Juliette Littman, and Sean Fennessy. Our story editor is Conor Nevins. Conor was the first person who came to me and said, hey, have you ever thought about making a podcast? And Conor was the first person I talked to about this idea. So if you somehow made it to the last episode of this show and just loathed all of it, you can blame him. It's really not my fault. Our producers are Devon, Renaldo. I'm going to say more about them in a second. Mike Wargon, who is currently looking a little too dangerous, in my opinion, in the 22 Goals World Cup staff pool, which I am losing handily, and Vikram Patel, whose formidable organizational powers would probably be put to better use running the Department of Defense or the CDC than running my silly soccer podcast. Seriously? You think you know your way around an Excel spreadsheet? You do not compared to Vikram. Fact checking by Kellen B. Coates. I've joked about Kellen in most of these credits bits, but the truth is, Kellen saved me from embarrassing myself more times than I'm going to try to count. If I did try, I would get the number wrong, and Kellen would have to jump in and fix it. Copy editing by Jacqueline Cantor. And it's a similar situation with Jacqueline. I could describe all the ways she saved me from myself this year, but I would inevitably need more saving in the course of attempting the description. Devon Renaldo did the sound design for the show. Devon also composed the theme song, which I would quite like to have playing whenever I enter a room, if possible, from now on, like Hail to the Chief, but better, obviously, than Hail to the Chief. And Devon also wrote a large majority of the other music for the show. I cannot tell you what a wild power trip it is for a writer to be told, write whatever you want, and here's a brilliant musician who will produce original music to accompany whatever you write. Absolutely unreal. Devon is also, perhaps, my favorite person to gossip about the Great British Bake Off with. That's called multitasking. Scott Somerville did additional mixing for the show. For a long time, I would notice that the sound of the show would magically get better at the very end of the mixing process. And then finally I realized that's not magic, that's Scott Somerville. David Shoemaker was the art director for 22 Goals. You know the extremely cool cover image that you see every time you look at the podcast on your podcast app? David made that. David also hosts like multiple other podcasts and just kind of quietly does everything extremely well. Annoying dude. I want to say thanks to everyone who worked on the Spanish and Portuguese translations of the show. I was so happy that we had Spanish and Portuguese translations. That was so cool. I especially want to say thanks to the narrators who had to pretend to be me. And honestly, sometimes I thought they were a little better at it than I was. And also, everyone who worked on the animations we put out for a few episodes. All right, what else? Some of the other music you heard in this episode was from Blue Dot Sessions. Match footage from FIFA. I want to send a special thanks out to Bill Simmons for keeping me gainfully employed against all odds for like half my adult life at this point. Thanks, Bill. I want to thank Siobhan and Lily Bean and Simon. Do I actually want to thank Simon? You know what? Why not? Thanks, pal. And I want to thank you. I have loved sharing this show with you. I hope we get to do it again sometime. Thanks for listening. All right, one more thing before I let you go. I have an announcement to make before we wind this thing down, before we put a period at the end of the old sentence. One major announcement with huge implications for the entire 22 Goals fan base and expanded universe, etc. You heard it here first. This has not been made public yet in any venue that I have seen. But I'll tell you right now, there are only 1,272 days to go before the start of the next World Cup.